Our reading comes from Unitarian Universalist Sue Andrews.
Our story today is Petuk.
As a boy, Jesus learned to be a carpenter. But after he grew up, he became a teacher and traveled all over Israel talking to people. Jesus talked about being a loving person, being kind, and helping those who need our help. He said we could see God's love in our loving relationships with other people. Jesus got very angry at people who put money first and people second. Crowds of people came to hear Jesus speak. A small group of people traveled with him. These were his disciples. In the spring at this time of year, Jews celebrate Passover, which is a very important Jewish special day. Jesus and his disciples traveled to Jerusalem to celebrate Passover. They came into the city on what we now call Palm Sunday, which is the Sunday before Easter. There were huge crowds and people spread palm branches on the road. Jesus rode on a little donkey over the palm branches. Jesus knew he was upsetting people in power. He was telling people that putting money first was wrong, that God loved all of God's children, that it was more important to be a loving person than it was to be powerful. And Jesus knew that he was going to get in big trouble with the authorities. It made the authorities very nervous that Jesus was so popular with the people. Sure enough, the priests and bankers went to the Roman governor Pontius Pilate and demanded that Jesus be arrested. And then after his arrest, these powerful people insisted that Jesus be put to death. In those days, criminals were killed by being nailed up on a cross, crucified. Jesus was put on a cross up on a hill between two robbers. After Jesus died, a good man named Joseph came to the authorities and asked to take away Jesus' body and put him in a tomb carved into a rocky hillside that Joseph had been saving for himself. This was on a Friday. Now the Jewish holy day begins Friday at sundown, so Joseph and the women who were very close to Jesus had to hurry and wrap his body in linen and put it in the tomb, because for Jews, Saturday, the Shabbat, is a holy day of rest, and no work at all may be done. The powerful people insisted that a stone be put in front of the tomb and that there be guards. On Saturday, the men and women who had been Jesus' disciples and close friends observed their Shabbat, their day of rest. But first thing Sunday morning, the women who had been closest to Jesus went to his tomb with spices and perfumes to put on Jesus' body. This is how the story goes in the Gospel of Luke in the New Testament of the Christian Bible. On the first day of the week, very early in the morning, the women took the spices they had prepared and went to the tomb. They found the stone rolled away from the tomb, but when they entered, they did not find the body of the Lord Jesus. While they were wondering about this, suddenly two men in clothes that gleamed like lightning stood beside them. In their fright, the women bowed down with their faces to the ground. But the men said to them, "Why do you look for the living among the dead? He is not here, he has risen. Remember how he told you, while he was still with you in Galilee, the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men, be crucified, and on the third day be raised again." Then they remembered his words. When they came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles. But they did not believe the women because their words seemed like nonsense. Peter, however, got up and ran to the tomb. Bending over, he saw the strips of linen laying by themselves, and he went away, wondering to himself what had happened. As Unitarian Universalists, we have many thoughts and ideas about what happened. but you should know that what Jesus said and what he did and the love he shared are still very much alive 2,000 years later. When I was growing up, Easter was the one time of year that my family went to church. We went to my grandma's Methodist church, and then we went to her house for Easter lunch. Easter never made a lot of sense to me as a kid. I didn't see the connection between bunnies and eggs and the death and resurrection of Jesus, but I enjoyed our family traditions and didn't worry about the details too much. When I found Unitarian Universalism back in 2004, Easter became one of the holidays I enjoyed the most. I liked going to church on Easter Sunday as it followed the tradition of my childhood, but now I wasn't being asked to pretend that bunnies and eggs had anything to do with Jesus, nor was I asked to pretend that the resurrection of Jesus had much meaning to me. It was the tradition at my home congregation to observe flower communion on Easter Sunday. So when I became your minister, I followed the tradition of my home congregation by offering flower communion at Chalice on Easter, which had already been Chalice's practice since 2006. And it's very common for Unitarian Universalists to observe flower communion on Easter. But it is worth knowing that flower communion was not originally an Easter celebration. It was celebrated at the start of the summer. And in some of our UU congregations, Easter has been a time for deep reflection and engagement with the Christian story of Jesus' death and resurrection. I have wondered the past few years if we've been missing out by mostly ignoring the resurrection story in favor of flower communion. So the unusual circumstances of this year, which prohibited our exchanging flowers with each other, felt like an invitation to me and to us to consider the Easter story and what meaning it might have for us, especially right now. What my family's annual Easter church visit failed to teach me is that Easter and the story of hope and transformation comes at the end of Lent and is the conclusion of Holy Week, and that understanding these is important to understanding Easter. Lent in the Christian tradition is a 6-week season of self-denial to prepare for Easter. It echoes Jesus' 40 days in the desert. Jokes about Lent have abounded this year, as all of us have had to give up so much, staying at home for quarantine. One social media meme noted that this Lent will go down as the lentiest Lent that has ever lented. You and I have observed Lent this year, whether we meant to or not. Holy Week began last Sunday, Palm Sunday, commemorating Jesus' arrival in Jerusalem. There are various traditions associated with the first part of the week. And then Thursday is known as Maundy Thursday, commemorating the Last Supper. Good Friday commemorates the crucifixion and death of Jesus. And because the Jewish Shabbat begins Friday at sundown, Jesus and his followers were Jewish, remember? Because of the need to prepare for Shabbat, Jesus was hurriedly placed in a tomb with the intention from his friends to finish embalming and proper burial ceremonies on Sunday, after Shabbat had ended. This is why women came to Jesus' tomb on Sunday morning and were surprised and dismayed to find it empty. It is that part of the story that I'm inviting us to reflect on this morning. It is easy for us to forget what a radical Jesus was, what he was walking around talking about, that we should love our enemies, that the meek, the poor, and the hungry will be rewarded in heaven, that material wealth gets in the way of knowing God. These teachings are as radical today as they were then. Right now, there are still homeless people on the streets of San Diego being moved along, forced to move, even in rain, because there's no place that they are supposed to be. When you hear of homeless people being housed at the convention center, those were people already in shelters. They're moved to the convention center to help observe social distancing. Well, there's not space for that in existing shelters. Homeless people with symptoms and with risk factors are being placed in hotels to help them self-isolate. Only after all shelters have moved their clients to the convention center, then attention will be turned to admitting people who have been living outdoors. We do not treat the poor and the hungry as though they are special in the eyes of God. We do not even talk about loving our enemies. We do not regard wealth as an impediment to knowledge, freedom, and happiness. So imagine that you had been following the teachings of such a radical, such a guide, when he was put to death as punishment for his radical teachings. Imagine living in a world where it seemed that corruption was rewarded, a world where meanness, vulgarity, and ignorance were revered, a world where the marginalized and oppressed were downtrodden and demonized. Imagine a world where the greatest leaders ignored their responsibilities to protect and care for their people. It is not hard to imagine this world. Here we are. Now imagine that someone you love is taken from you too soon and for all the wrong reasons. And when you come to tend their body after their passing, when you come to grieve and honor your beloved, that instead of finding them where they are supposed to be, instead you find an empty tomb. Easter morning so long ago was no time for rejoicing. It was, in fact, a time of confusion and great uncertainty. What had happened? What was happening? Who were the men at the tomb? Could their words be true? Remember, when the women came back from the tomb, they told all these things to the 11 and to all the others. It was Mary Magdalene, Joanna, Mary, the mother of James, and the others with them who told this to the apostles. But they did not believe the women because their words seemed to them like nonsense. Have you read supposed information about the coronavirus and not been sure what to believe? Even now, in this incredible age of science and information, it is hard to know what to believe and what to ignore. Information is abundant, but so is misinformation. We too are living in a time of confusion and great uncertainty. And so now, perhaps we can understand in a way we might never have before, why for Christians there is so much joy and reverence for the Easter story and the belief in Jesus' resurrection. Wouldn't we all welcome some good news today? Instead of confusion, clarity. Instead of uncertainty, rejoicing. And in the jubilance of that story, wouldn't we too find satisfaction in knowing that tyrants had been overcome, that injustice had been righted, that callous leaders were no longer triumphant, but instead had been vanquished by one who taught that the meek are blessed and will inherit the earth? I think we would. Easter coincides with spring, and we tend to use rebirth to describe their shared meaning. But rebirth isn't really the right word, I would suggest. transformation is, in my opinion. When a tree drops its leaves in the fall and then grows new ones in the spring, it is not the same leaves that grow again. They are new leaves. The Jesus who is resurrected in the Christian stories is not who he was before, and he does not return to his previous earthly life to continue traveling and teaching. He is transformed. He's changed. He's no longer only human. He is now also divine. We do not go through the losses of life and emerge untouched. We are changing even now in ways we can't fully see or understand. We will only know when this is all over and we can look back with some clarity and self-awareness. What Easter promises is that our suffering, our loss, whatever you want to call this time, that it will come to an end and that there will be joyfulness and laughter and lightness again. There are now, in fact, leaders we can trust, news we can believe, people who are helping one another. Look at the world around us. Millions of people are staying home, hoping to slow the spread of the virus. Artists give free concerts online. Museums offer online tours. Zoos put animals on cameras. We are all working together to pass the time the best that we can. Humanity is so much more loving and cooperative than we sometimes give ourselves credit for. Today might not be the day we had hoped for, but that doesn't make today a bad day. We still have loved ones to connect with and ways to be connected. We still have each other. And we still have tomorrow and more tomorrows to be hopeful for.